Welcome. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. For the audience that are joining us, this is the first podcast on the Food Collective portal. Neil comes from a consultancy background. His consultancy is called Neil Madgwick Science Consultancy, and he's going to be joining us to talk about a very pertinent issue, one that I think is very important for the food industry. We're going to be dealing with environmental monitoring, particularly early warning signs in the process environment. So how do we pick up proactively issues in our facilities? So it's all about environmental monitoring and swabbing and to get good results. Neil, thanks for joining us. For the audience, would you like to tell us who you are, what you've been up to, where you come from, and give us a brief understanding of you?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. So as Matthew said, my name is Neil. I'm a microbiologist by trade, and have been working in various fields of microbiology during my career. I started off in the veterinary. I've done some pharmaceutical work, but I've ended up by default kind of in the food industry. And that's where I've been for the last number of years, and I've done some interesting consulting jobs up in Africa in the food industry up there. And the other thing that that I've ended up doing is there's a gap in the market where we've my business partner and myself have developed some products for quality control and environmental testing in the food industry. So that's kind of what I'll be talking a little bit about that now, and we'll get to introduce those products to you. But yeah, that's where I'm at in a nutshell. And yeah, let's chat.
Great. Thank you very much. And yeah, welcome to the Food Collective. This is our first podcast, and you're the first dummy to test the process.
The guinea pig.
So we will. Yeah, thank you for that. So
Sure.
Environmental monitoring. I think there's not much legal framework in South Africa for environmental monitoring. We do have to do swabs to prove that our cleaning works, but the GFSI has included environmental monitoring in their benchmark standard, and most manufacturers, when they get audited, are required to have an environmental monitoring program in place.
Yeah.
My understanding of environmental monitoring based on these standards and audits is that you're trying to identify faults, you're trying to find where the problems are so that you can address them and reduce your risk. So we understand that environmental monitoring is really about early warning signs in your processing environment. What is the meaning of that? How does it work? What does it mean to have early warning signs in food processing?
So yeah, so I guess the easiest way to do it is to have an analogy. If you're driving your car on the dashboard and your fuel light comes on, it means there's going to be a problem in the next couple of kilometers if you don't do something about it. And that's pretty much what early warning signs, environmental monitoring thoughts are, the way that it works. So it's an indicator that conditions in your facility are such that are shifting, or there's something happening that could allow contamination to develop in your products. And the idea is that you want to nip those things in the bud before they get into your products. So get those contaminants out of your facility or away from your product line before they get into your product, because we all know what happens when they do get in. Then it costs money. It could cost brand. It could cost damage your brand. So the idea is to try and monitor your facility and your environment as much as you can, and identify where those risks are and what those risks are, and sort them out before they become a problem. And so, yeah, there's a definite advantage in knowing all that information, knowing that data, and having that data available and watching the trends. We're going to talk about that later. That you can develop and find trends. And I'm going to mention this right at the start. Build a hygiene profile from environmental testing that'll allow you to make quick and effective decisions to mitigate the risks of getting contamination in food.
Okay. So I think currently, certainly in the South African framework, I think corporate businesses have maybe been doing environmental monitoring a little bit more frequently and for a longer period. Slightly smaller businesses, probably not as much. I think there's budget constraints. I think it's very clear that in the food industry, cost matters because we want to have the cheapest cost available for consumers. Everyone wants to make their little piece, and the only way you do that is by mitigating or reducing your overhead costs. And testing, quality control, compliance becomes very expensive very quickly, especially when you're looking at swabbing. And this requirement for environmental monitoring, you say you test as much as you can. There's a very big difference between not testing at all and testing every day. And there's a fine line to have. You can always test more, but that costs money and it makes it unaffordable to do that. And there has to be a balance. What I found previously, many people do swabs. How many swabs do you do? Well, we all test hand swabs to prove that the cleaning of hands works. We test surface swabs to test that our cleaning of the surfaces was actually adequate and that our cleaning system works. One then gets results from those tests. Those tests might be out of specification, which demonstrates that the cleaning program was not sufficient. And then we open a non-conformance and we try and figure things out. Or we get a customer complaint that someone got sick from our product or that the product was spoiled in some way. And we then have to react on that and try and identify why. So facilities often rely on these reactive testings rather than early detecting. Why do they rely on the old school methodology, and why have they not incorporated more environmental monitoring to find issues earlier?
I think
what's your thought process?
I think, well, personally, I think that the reason for it is that the regulations require, or it is required to test environmentally, and so they do what they need to, as opposed to what is best. And I know there's budgetary constraints, but it's a mindset shift. People need to realize that it's not just compliance that you're wanting to address here. It's actually can be used. Environmental monitoring can be used as a control tool. It's a tool in your belt as the manager or as the management or the QC manager of a facility. If you have that data, you can make sure that, well, as best as you can make sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent contamination before it happens. And so there's that mindset shift of this is what I need to do and it's what I'm required to do to, hey, I can use this to make sure that my products don't get contaminated. And so the product that I am putting out into the market is the best it can be. So that's the mindset shift that needs to happen, I think, in the industry.
Do you think that I always go back to culture, food safety culture. Organizations need a culture of prevention rather than reaction. It must be the intent not just to make money, but actually to do it properly. When we talk about production, and there's always this dichotomy or this fight between quality and production. Production mustn't just make 1,000 units of whatever. They must make 1,000 units that are to specification. They must be perfect units. And when we look at it with that mindset, we tend to put quality on the forefront, put cleanliness and hygiene on the forefront. So if I'm making 100 good quality units, Production must not be manufacturing in a dirty environment. Production must not be using inferior raw materials. Then production can manufacture good units. And it's not to be bad-mouthing production at all, but quality control then can focus on trying to identify where those problematic areas are. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the problem as early as possible, as frequently as possible. And once we address those problems, so if we find listeria in the drain during the middle of production, we know that that drain is not suitable and needs to be cleaned more frequently. So we need to then do something about it to reduce the frequency of potential contamination. If we find E. coli in the biltong factory while we're packing biltong on people's hands, we need to deal with that and not just assume that they didn't wash their hands, but actually that they're not doing things frequently enough. Maybe they need to hand wash more frequently, etc. I think that's really the thought process behind environmental monitoring to allow us to mitigate risks as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I mean it works across the board for who does this. You mentioned production. Who benefits from the environmental testing? Is it just the management or just the QC guys? It's actually everyone in the facility, because production, you go to the production manager and you say, hey, listen, we found some listeria in our product. We have to shut down the facility for the next 3 days while we sort it out. He's going to flip his lid because he's got production schedule in mind. And the guy that's on the floor also benefits from it, because he's also he needs to know that he can see that when he cleans something, it's done well. So he's accountable, and it feeds into that culture. So it starts right from the guy who's working on the floor all the way up to management. It's not just for the management guys to bring out the big whip. It's actually a tool that can be used across board and assist all of the players in the business.
So actually, conversely, if there are problems found when you do environmental monitoring, all of them must take responsibility. To understand that we broke down the chain somewhere along the line, and we all need to fix it at the same time. So
absolutely,
when we talk environmental monitoring, obviously it's different to hygiene verification. Hygiene verification is really proving your process of cleaning, to verify that the cleaning works. What is the real difference between swabbing for hygiene verification and swabbing for pathogen detection? And then I want to add to that, is environmental monitoring merely pathogen detection, or does it incorporate also things like yeast and mold and lactic acid bacteria in certain aspects where it's more spoilage related? Can it be done for spoilage organisms as well, or do we only refer to it as pathogen detection?
No, so there's kind of two aspects to the environmental testing from a microbiology point of view. Remember, environmental monitoring is not just microbiology. It's a whole lot of the microbiology testing is one of the tools in the belt of the environmental testing, environmental monitoring. So visual testing and visual, what does it look like, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole lot of other aspects, but from a microbiology point of view, the two aspects are, as you mentioned, the pathogen detection. And the other one is just from a microbiology point of view, how clean is it? So there's no pathogens, fair enough. But what about all the other bacteria that are there? Has it been cleaned properly? Has the disinfectant worked and done its job properly to get rid of all the any contaminants that are there? Because you got indicator organisms that will very quickly tell you, okay, so the surface that's been cleaned is actually not clean, and it could potentially become a problem. Okay, fair enough, there's no pathogens there at the moment, but if there's other bacteria there, then there could be pathogens. So that's the difference. So you've got you want to be able to pick up and detect the pathogens. At the same time, you want to see how clean, from a microbiology point of view, that area or that specific surface is, so that it doesn't become a problem with the pathogen arriving. From a spoilage point of view, because there's no pathogen, there could be a spoilage organism there as well. So there's those two aspects, if you see that, the pathogen as well as the overall hygiene that you want to test for when you're testing from a microbiology point of view, the environment.
So I think it's a very important part of the process. It's very important to understand when you're implementing HACCP, one of the first things you do is product descriptions. And when you describe your product, you have to understand your product. What is the pH? What is the water activity? And once you understand and have described the product, you can identify those hazards associated with that product, particularly the microbiological hazards, as well as microbiological quality control points, including spoilage organisms. So you need to define what is particular to your product. If you're dealing with cooked, processed, ready-to-eat meat, we know that Listeria monocytogenes is a viable pathogen that is commonly associated with those programs, and you need to include it in your environmental monitoring program.
Yeah.
And it's not good enough just to do 1 or 2 drain swabs with Listeria monocytogenes. You also need to do it on surfaces intermittently during production. We're not trying to prove that the cleaning worked. We want to know that during production there hasn't been some form of cross-contamination, which could cause problems with the processed meat.
Yeah.
So it's important to make sure that those swabs are specific for the pathogens concerned and the potential spoilage organisms concerned as well.
Yeah. And I mean, can I just throw something in there as well? Is that, and this is coming back to that whole mindset shift of it's a control tool as opposed to just a compliance thing. Is that when you are testing for those particular things, those particular bacteria, whether they're pathogens or spoilage, you need to think about where they are and not just test the nice shiny clean stainless steel top. It's the product, what your product is, as well as where you're testing. So where is Listeria going to hang out? It's not going to be on the shiny clean stainless steel top. It's going to be underneath the stainless steel table in the little groove. So it's not about trying to impress the auditor with your results. It's a tool to say, okay, this is a problem, or this is a potential problem. We've picked up a problem here. So it's where you're testing, what you're testing for, which is related to what products you're making. So it's a whole holistic approach, as opposed to just taking random swabs anyway.
And I think the culture mind shift from the owners of a business perspective must be, I need to find the problem. I want to find the problem. Give me find the issue so that I can act on the issue and improve my systems. So we mustn't be scared of positive results. We must be wanting to find positive results so we can continually improve the management of those areas to reduce the risk.
And if you're doing it correctly, you'll find those problems areas, and then you'll get it to a point where your problems are largely under control. And then it's a matter of monitoring and maintaining and making sure the systems and the cleaning procedures are still intact. And then by monitoring the trends, you'll very quickly pick up when another problem arises. So it's not a matter of you've got to see that the mindset shift. It's a tool that you can use to get your facility to a point where it is clean, and then you can monitor to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
So traditionally, environmental monitoring would be done using swabs. We would take a cotton swab, we would hydrate it in some sort of buffered peptone water or something like that. We'll go and swab the drain, we'll go and swab the surfaces, we'll go and test it for listeria, and it can take up to 9 days to get a listeria result. I think modern microbiology takes up to 7 days. There might be one or two more rapid methods, slightly more rapid methods. But now I find a result after, say, 5 days. For argument's sake, 5 days, I get my results from the lab and they say that you had listeria 5 days ago. Now I have to already react because that product's been manufactured. When we're talking listeria, it's probably short shelf life, high risk manufactured product. So it's probably in the shops already. It's probably been eaten. Now I don't know if my product has it and that product's going to be eaten, but it might have contaminated that product already. Speed is of the utmost importance here so that we can eliminate the hazard and not contaminate. Because if I wait 5 days, I might have had 5 days worth of contamination going on. How do I handle this, and how do like speed's obviously clearly important to get early warning. How do we handle this issue?
So you want to try and get results as quickly as possible. I mean, I'll give you there's been a number of times some of my clients where they've used so at this point I'm going to introduce my products, the Praecautio range of swabs that are used in-house. And there's been a number of occasions where clients have used the Praecautio swabs and picked up a potential problem within 24 hours and phoned me, and together we've managed to sort it out. They held the batch back so that it wasn't released into the market. So there wasn't anything about recall, but they obviously lost that batch, that they couldn't sell that batch. They had to destroy that particular batch of whatever it was, but their brand was saved. There wasn't the expense of recall and all that kind of stuff. So your idea is to try and get the results as quickly as possible. With the rapid lab tests, they have made much improvement over the years since I first started my career many years ago. They've knocked a couple of days off some of those turnaround times. But at the same time, if you can have a result in-house within 24 hours, you can react so much faster and sort things out without anyone even knowing, except what's happening within your actual facility.
So I've come across, sorry, I probably mustn't interrupt you here, but I've come across ATP tests. Where people come with ATP tests, they put it into a fancy device which costs a fortune, but it rapidly gives you a value of ATP, which is correlating with some energy living molecule. And so that indicates that it is contaminated with product that has ATP on it and is dirty. But obviously ATP does not say it's listeria or it's salmonella or whatever the pathogen might be. So just because it has ATP doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It could be a piece of meat, I suppose. Meat has molecules in it. It's got living cells in it, and cells have ATP. So it could be that it was just a piece of meat, and it so happens that I pack meat, so it doesn't really prove much other than it hasn't been cleaned. Whereas a rapid method like this will tell you specifically it's an organism within 24 hours. So it's probably quite effective.
And whether it's a potential pathogen, which could be a problem. So ATP swabs are great, and I would suggest probably using them in conjunction with say something like the Praecautio range, but that it's not going to give you those specifics, which is the data that you want. That's what you're wanting to. That's what helps you make those decisions.
So when we are using swabbing techniques, any type of swabbing techniques, the focal point should probably be in the higher risk areas. Makes sense that it's in the higher risk areas, because if I'm manufacturing something like polony, processed, ready to eat processed meat, I want to find the Listeria monocytogenes. I want to find the salmonella that's in my ready-to-eat products. I don't want a chicken abattoir making something and then having cross-contamination. So doing zones within a facility is important. It's critical for us to zone the different areas. We don't really worry about what's happening outside in the, the outside offices. But what we do care about is what's happening in the low risk area, what's happening in the high risk and high care area, what's happening on the line where we've got the sliced bologna or sliced sandwich ham going into the packets on the automatic packaging lines. What's happening at that blade interface. So I think the zones matter where we're trying to identify if there is cross-contamination, and that would be during production. Is that correct?
During production, and you can use them after your cleaning. That'll verify your actual your PRPs, your programs of cleaning and sanitation. But during production as well, especially after your what they call lethality steps, once you've done, if you've got something that's being cooked, theoretically there shouldn't be anything from a bacterial point of view if you've cooked correctly at the right temperature and all the rest. But directly after that, the post-lethality zone, as it were, what's happening there, and that can verify your actual lethality step. Is it doing its job? Is cooking the thing, number one? Is it actually taking out all the bacteria? And then going forward from that, so now you've taken your whatever it is out of the cook, out of the post the cooking, and now it's being packaged. Now you need to check there as well, because now the cooking no longer, whatever's been taken out there, something could be introduced from a handling point of view. So that's a post-lethality, but it's a high-risk area. So that's the kind of mindset you need to have is when you putting together your schedule of and your program of how you're going to do the environmental testing, is to figure out where the high-risk areas are of introducing pathogens as well as contamination, spoilage.
So I'm just thinking out of the box in my mind at the moment. One does hand swabs. Hand swabs are showing that the hand cleaning process eliminates E. coli and staph. Often we've seen that the requirement has been just testing E. coli and staph. Staph aureus. Some people are advocates of also doing total count on hands, other people not. And that's maybe a discussion for another day. I know I've spoken to some laboratories about that, and they have very staunch views on that, and I'd love to get into that at some point. But when we maybe in the high-risk section and we're switching on the slicer and we're touching buttons, maybe switching on at the power button to switch on the slicer, or we calibrating for a different pack size. Is it important to be then testing Staph aureus and E. coli as an environmental contaminant on those buttons in the high-risk area? Would that be something to consider? It's not just Listeria. Everyone gets worried.
No, absolutely, because that's where your contamination is going to come in, because theoretically your Listeria should be, if it was there, it should have been taken out in the cooking process. So now you've taken it out, but now Listeria is no longer the problem unless there's another area in that particular zone where Listeria can get in. But let's assume there isn't. But Staph aureus and E. coli definitely are, because those are handling contaminants. So that's what you need to be checking for. So you're not going to be checking for everything everywhere. You're going to be very pinpoint and check for certain handling zones. You're going to be checking your Staph aureus, your E. coli. And
even though we know the hand cleaning process works.
Even though you know the hand, here's the thing: is that we all know that as human beings we take short corners every now and again. And it just takes.
I mean, I don't. I'm perfect. All of you guys.
Of course not. Of course not. You're perfect. I do. And we all know that. And it just takes one worker who's maybe they're tired from the night before and they haven't washed their hands properly or whatever it is.
Or they've picked their nose and they've continued.
Or they picked their nose and they got a staph infection. And all of a sudden you now got staph in your thing, even though your hand washing regime has worked. So random testing of hands as well as surfaces that the hands are touching are a fundamental when you got a high handling zone, as it were.
So when we go into this risk-based approach to try and create an environmental monitoring program, have you implemented this before? Have you had experience with implementing it? I'm just trying to give our audience a little bit of an understanding of how do we do a risk-based approach. Now, I suppose we go and do the factory layout diagram. We identify high risk and low risk zones, high risk, high care, low risk. And then we're going to have to go into each of those areas and say, this is a high handling point, high touch point. This is maybe not as much. So somewhere like the control panel on the slicer and on the packaging machine is going to be very problematic, where maybe the wall at the entrance to the high risk area is not as problematic. How would you go about trying to identify the risky points to say this is where we need to focus on swabbing, and then probably what organisms are associated there, because we want to be specific?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very much going through the facility and seeing what the process is, where your lethality steps are, and directly after that, what can happen to introduce contamination at that point, and then what is going to happen, and then what particular bacteria or organisms are we worried about, and then it sounds if someone hasn't been doing environmental testing can sound quite daunting, but the idea is just to start and start with your high risk zones. I always say especially if you're starting environmental testing, start with quite a few and just get an overall picture of what your facility looks like, the hygiene of your facility. And you'll very quickly be able to see where the hot zones are, call them. And then you can sort those out and then retest. And then once you have those zones and your facility sorted, and it's kind of maintaining the hygiene is pretty much under control, then it's a matter of maintenance and seeing, and then just swabbing randomly or according to a schedule, which then you can, it'll quickly show when something comes up. But it's specifically testing, so you're not wanting to test for everything everywhere. You want to test specifics depending on what the zone is. So it is about going through your facility and looking at your process and thinking very carefully what can contaminate here, and what should we be testing for.
I wonder if, yeah, it makes sense completely. I mean, this is an interesting concept now, because when you do HACCP as a food safety team, you're going to walk to the slicer. The slicing is a process step, or waiting time while your polony is waiting somewhere, or maybe you're working on wherever you are in the process. You sit there as a team and you look at the top, you look above, you look below, you look where it is, and you say, what are the risks?
Yeah.
So when I do a hazard analysis, I'm already saying E. coli is a risk here because the person touches XYZ. The person might do XYZ. They might touch their nose, and that might be, throughout the hazard analysis. So your hazard analysis is really a very important aspect of trying to understand where those hazards are. It's you being critical and you're documenting it. And then you go and lay it out on a plan, and your environmental monitoring plan is, we know that you could touch your nose there. We do have a personal hygiene procedure in place. So theoretically, the risk should be low. But I need to use environmental monitoring to assess at random that actually the program is working.
Yeah. So it's a verification tool as well for your program.
No.
And I mean, I'll give you an example. I've had a client who just couldn't figure out there was contamination happening in the one product, and they just couldn't figure out what it was. And we tested and we did environmental testing, and the program was being run and it was on schedule and all the rest. And then we figured out that the disinfectant had expired and it wasn't effective anymore. And it was as simple as that. And it was verifying the fact that we didn't realize that all along environmental testing was verifying the fact that there was something wrong with the actual, we thought it was coming in on raw material, but it was actually the actual process of disinfecting that was where the problem was. So they changed they got new disinfectant in, and hey presto, the problem went away.
So what you're saying is that actually sometimes your cleaning chemicals don't work.
Sometimes the cleaning chemicals don't work. Sometimes you get bacteria that are a little bit stronger than the others and survive. That particular one, maybe you need to swap out your cleaning materials every now and again so that you don't get. So it's verifying those things and by building that hygiene profile and having those trends and watching those trends very carefully, you'll very quickly see there's a problem, and then you can go back and you can do an analysis, a problem solving and seeing where the problem is, figuring it
out. I'm resonating in my experience. How many times there's always this complaint with the chemical industry, and they say, no, your chemicals don't work. No, but I use the chemicals right. There's nothing wrong with the chemicals. Is it the chemicals? No, it's you not cleaning properly. I know, but I am cleaning properly. It's very important. And I actually came across something the other day. There's a requirement within the ISO standards and the FSSC standards, BRC as well, to validate your cleaning program. And what does validate mean? Yeah. It's not just verify that it was clean. It's, for argument's sake, use the product between 2% or 1% and 5%. Use it 1% if there's not much soiling. Use it at 5% if there's a lot of fat and soil. Okay, great. Well, how much must I use in my factory? How do I quantify that my soiling is so much that I need to use it at 3.5% and not 2%? Because if I'm only using it at 2% in a meat factory, it's probably not strong enough, depending what the chemical is, obviously, and depending on the nature of the production. And that validation program is so critical to make sure we're using the soap at the right concentration for that application. Because if someone tells me use it between 1% and 5%, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to use it at 1%.
Yeah, it's cheaper.
I don't want to use it at 2%. I'm going to double my cost.
Yeah.
So it's a very important thing that we realize that validation process and the verification process. And I suppose that's where environmental monitoring comes in, is because maybe twice a day we need to be cleaning the place. Maybe not a proper thorough scrub down, but maybe we need some level of application and rinse. I remember when I was working in poultry abattoirs, come lunchtime or tea time, we were foaming down those lines. It had an effect on reducing some level of contamination. It wasn't a full wash down. The end of the shift, then the cleaning came in and they went and did what they had to do. But there was a level of cleaning, and so many times in butchery environments, you don't see any wiping down and cleaning down at lunchtime. So they just go on lunch, come back, start up again. Now, if you're dealing with fresh meat that gets cooked, it's maybe not a problem. If you're dealing with a high-risk environment, maybe a salad factory or maybe a processed meat factory where they're cutting up roast beef and putting it into packets, well, that then becomes a bit more of a problem. Yeah. So, it's very important to understand all aspects of the system and what you do.
Yeah.
And be very specific about that to identify where the problems are so you can continually improve. So one of the questions I've sort of been thinking about, or what we've been thinking about, is in organizations, you get a variety of teams. You get the management team, you get the quality assurance team, you get the production team. Production wants to make units. Quality wants to not make units because they want to make sure everything's perfect. And then if everything's perfect and we're always cleaning, we never have time to make anything. And management just wants money in their bank. So cut back all your expenses. This in-house testing can be very expensive. We can do lots of it. We can do none of it. If I do no testing, I never find a problem, and then I don't have a problem, right? Guys, that's not serious. A problem. That's a tongue-in-cheek joke. The reality is we have to test. How does testing like this benefit everyone? How does testing how does production benefit from you coming in the middle of my production day to test my product?
Well, if you can think about it this way, if you can prevent a batch of product being tested and coming back with a positive result for salmonella or listeria or E. coli, and then going to the production manager and saying, all right, we need to shut down the production line for the next 3 days while we sort out this problem, as opposed to, can I take 5 minutes and just swab some of your production staff's hands, and can we just turn off, or you don't even have to turn off the machines, can I just swab some of the equipment around the facility? I won't get under your feet, and find that problem before it gets into the actual batch, and sort out that problem as soon as possible. During shutdown at night time, we can do a thorough clean, check the next day. He's going to be a lot happier than having to shut down the whole facility for whatever, 3 days or a week while we try and figure out what's happening. At the same time, the management are going to be quite happy for you taking swabs and spending a little bit of extra money instead of having to deal with a recall. I mean, those are worst case scenarios. I know I'm painting the bad picture, but that's how bad it can be. I've had a couple of clients where their brand has literally been saved because they've managed to figure out what's happening using environmental swabbing before the batch was exported. If it reaches Europe and suddenly there's salmonella in your batch or whatever it is, that's it. Your contract for Europe is gone. So,
so dealing with results early on is much better than having to do a recall. I think Tiger Brands had their listeriosis issue in South Africa in 2017. Enterprise does not exist anymore. It's a brand that has been around for almost 100 years or so.
Yeah,
it's disappeared. It's gone. It's gone because, well, we can ask why, but the reality was Listeria was implicated with their brand, and the brand has now disappeared. And so the net effect and I don't know anyone there. I don't know what happened. I know there was accusations of listeriosis, Listeria monocytogenes in there, according to their brand. But the reality is that good information that ended up on the table of senior management should have enabled shutdowns, hygiene problems to get cleaned away, and then we should have had a clean process. And elevated environmental monitoring should have assisted with the right information to do the thorough cleaning necessary to reduce the risk. Exactly. And so the philosophy is always going to be do as much testing as necessary to have big data so that we can make decisions on where we need to focus, and then do spot checks as we can. It's not necessary to test every single day for the rest of your life. No. But in the first month, it's probably a good idea to test every single day.
Yeah.
And in the second month, once we've done it every day and we've been very specific, you need to act as a policeman to try and identify the problem. I think we alluded to that earlier. We need to then, once we've tested every single day, reduce it based on risk, but test as needed to try and identify problems, because we do know people make mistakes. We do know people sometimes take shortcuts, and we do want to use this to try and identify where those issues are. We can't live, with our heads in the sand, assuming that everyone's going to be doing everything perfectly every single day. And just because I did it perfect last week doesn't mean that it's perfect this week.
Yeah.
Coming back to your products, your Praecautio range of products, those are rapid methods. Do you want to just elaborate a little bit on what does rapid methods mean? You said 24 hours, I think. And how, can we trust the results? I mean, normally we have to have all these SANIS accredited methods that take 4 days to do. How do we know that your product works, and how does it work? And how do we use it?
Let me say this up front, is that your SANIS accredited methods, because they are required from a regulation point of view, especially your product testing and certain environmental testing. These don't replace those; they add to them. You can't just not do your SANAS accredited tests. That still needs to happen. However, having the Praecautio swab tests and using them in your facility allows you to have that data that we've been speaking about. It gives you that the hygiene profile and the trends. So how they work is it's a color-based reaction. So for instance, the E. coli swab, if you swab a surface within 24 hours, if there's E. coli on that surface, it will turn like a bluey green color. If that bluey green color is there, it raises a red flag straight away. You have E. coli present. The same with Staph aureus. If you swab someone's hand with a Staph aureus swab and it turns a pink color, then there's potentially Staph aureus on that person's hand, and that can raise a red flag for management. So within 24 hours, you have this data that you can then react on. Apart from just having the specific bacteria, so E. coli, Salmonella, Staph aureus, it also just an explanation. So bacteria are pretty much split into two large groups. There's a gram-positive and a gram-negative. Gram-positives, so Staph aureus, fall into that group. And that particular swab, if you swab a surface or a hand and it doesn't turn pink, but it turns like a mauve or a blue, it means that there's a gram-positive bacteria there, but it's not necessarily Staph aureus. So it gives you that indication of the hygiene. So remember we spoke about the two different aspects of environmental testing, from a microbiology point of view, the actual pathogens, the specifics, and then the overall hygiene. So these swabs do both. So if there's other colors other than the specific targeted organism color, then it means that there's gram-positive bacteria there. Same with E. coli. If it's not blue, but it's pink or mauve, it means it's not E. coli, but there are other organisms that are gram-negative. So using both of them, it gives you a great overview of the hygiene as well as the possibility of detecting the specific pathogens if they are there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense completely.
Yeah.
So I mean, it gives an indication of a whole lot of different things, and that could be indicative. So although a certain pathogen's not there, we do want to know hygiene state to make decisions.
Yes.
Within reason, obviously. I think most of this comes down to high-risk manufacturers as well. People that eat ready-to-eat products that could make you sick immediately.
Yeah.
We don't want contamination in those realms because we don't want to compromise shelf life. We don't want to compromise spoilage. We want the shelf life to sustain itself, and we don't want to have pathogens because we don't want people to get sick. And that's ultimately it. So when we're making food, when we're manufacturing food, we want it to be safe for its entire period. And the way we do that, one of the big aspects of doing this, and I've got a whole other set of lectures that I'm going to be recording over time, but you cannot make safe food with bad raw materials. You cannot make safe food without processing properly, and you cannot make safe food without cleaning properly. And environmental monitoring is that process of making sure, not that necessarily our cleaning process doesn't work, but that we have, say that, if I've got time and dilution correct, and I do the swab after I've cleaned properly, and I've been very diligent with that, okay, then I know the cleaning process can work. But there's a whole lot of other aspects that we're trying to verify here. We want to try and verify, is our frequency of cleaning sufficient? Is our method of cleaning sufficient? Not just time-temperature combination, but how we scrub, how we rinse, how we do this, how we do that, and are we doing it enough? And I think we're trying to delve deeper into the nuances. We might have all these great cleaning procedures, but if maintenance is only taking apart the CIP lines once a month, the gaskets, for instance, once a month. Maybe that's not frequently enough. So maybe we should take it apart once a week. And so that environmental process, the monitoring process, will be indicative of testing whether our procedures are enough or not. It's a verification that our procedures are suitable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a food processor and I'm considering your swabs. I think everyone's going to say, well, what's the cost of this? This must be very expensive. I think we must start with traditional environmental monitoring procedures. I know that I've been involved with developing a hygiene indicator. There's a couple of other ones. It works on catalase reactions. If there's a biofilm involved and the biofilm has a whole lot of organisms in it, it breaks down the biofilm wall and it reacts with the catalase. It bubbles like crazy, turns color. It's an indication that there's a potential issue there. That's quite an affordable way, but it's not specific. It doesn't say there is listeria there. You've also got traditional swab methods. Traditional swabs, 5 to 7 days to get a result from a lab. So if I tested today and I made a salad with a 4-day shelf life, the salad's going to be in industry and eaten before anything, before we get the result. But it means that we've probably contaminated the salad over the last little while. Funnily enough, if you look at SANS 885, the definition for high-risk foods or for processed meat and listeria, they always talk about a shelf life. And I stand to be corrected because I'm going out of memory here. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's production plus 4 days or plus 5 days. So if the shelf life is longer than 4 days, then we potentially have a problem. But the traditional swab costs quite a lot of money. I think a hand swab for staff is about 70 Rand. A drain swab for listeria can be up to 220 Rand. The benefit of swabs is you enumerate, so you know how much is there, but it also takes 5 days. So swabs take a long time to have a result, which means you can't react quickly. And we said earlier, we want speed. So what is the cost of your product? If a staff one costs 70 Rand, how much does yours cost? I think cost is a matter.
Yeah, so they all retail for around about 53 Rand. So it's a lot cheaper. And I mean, you do get enumeration for, if you're doing testing salmonella, you get a number, but essentially the limits are 0. So if it's there, it's a problem.
Yeah.
So you can get those results for a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time, 24 hours.
And I think salmonella, I stand to be corrected, but typically salmonella on the accredited methods, you get this detection and then you have to get a presumptive positive and a confirmation. So you end up having to wait a bit longer to get the test result correctly. And that also then lends itself to other issues. From a
Look, it's always good. It's always good. I'll say this up front. It's always good to check what's on the swab is salmonella, but it's a quick 24-hour red flag that can be put up, and can be sorted out a lot quicker than, because there's salmonella testing is a couple of days, or a good couple of days in a lab, especially with they won't release the result properly unless they've
and your chromogenic tests, you say it takes 24 hours, but I probably after 12 hours would have an idea.
Yeah. So I'll say 24 hours for a negative. So if there's nothing there and there's no color after 24 hours, it's a negative result. But if there's something there and you start seeing the results, like if you do a swab in the morning and before you go home, you check them quickly and there's a color there, then you can actually react straight away. Especially if there's a potential pathogen detected.
This obviously doesn't stop you from having to do regular testing on the batches of product, because we're trying to identify contaminants in an area as opposed to the food being contaminated, and there's still need for product verification, product and process verification.
Yeah. So in theory, if you're doing your environmental testing correctly, your product testing, which you should be doing, like I've said, should come back negative, unless your contaminant's coming in from the raw materials, obviously. But if you are preventing contamination from the environment into your product, you shouldn't be getting positive results on a product, because that's a headache, having a result come back with a positive result from a product.
If I get a positive result on an environmental test, should my protocol be then go and take the retention sample and or one or two other samples that might be in the facility or in your warehouse and send that for analysis as a confirmation that it's not in the product, and then maybe still release it? I mean, we're not going to hold back a whole batch just because there was listeria in your drain.
No, I would, I mean, it's a case by case basis, really. If you've done testing and your testing's come back on the product and it's clean, but you picked it up in the drain, then I'm not going to say that just release it. You say you have a look at it from a case by case basis, but it doesn't mean to say that there is listeria in the product. However, listeria being in the drain could end up in a product. So that's the problem that you need to sort out before it becomes that's the issue you need to sort out before it becomes a problem, and then you start doing it.
Yeah, if you pick it up in the drain, maybe you need to start looking at the tables and the contact surfaces close by to that drain to make sure that it's not maybe present there. And you need to do that before you clean all those surfaces.
Yeah. I mean, especially, can you imagine that particular water is being used in the hand washing? Now all of a sudden, now you do need to be testing listeria for a short bit in your handling zones, as it were. Just to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think what this does, and this is a great conversation, or great starter piece. I hope people have stayed to listen to the end. But we're going to have to probably have one or two webinars where we can ask questions and engage with people. So those of you that are still listening and you find this topic interesting, you want more information, please send us questions. You can email us at info@thefoodcollective.co.za. If we can have a repository of questions, we can possibly put together a nice little webinar on trying to be practical with environmental monitoring. I think in summary, if we think about this big picture that we have, what would be the one big message that you want to get across regarding early warning swabbing, about doing environmental swabbing and getting results quickly?
I think my biggest thing is that, and this is what I've found with many industry players, is that it's that mindset shift of environmental monitoring is a useful thing. It's a control tool. It's a tool that you can use to make sure that your product is as high quality as you can, as opposed to this is something I have to do because I'm required to doing it. So if they can have that mindset shift, then it becomes sounds like this is a microbiology nerd talking. It's an exciting thing to be able to do environmental monitoring and to check the trends and to make sure that your facility, imagine 6 months down the line after starting your environmental testing program, you're getting consistent negative results. That's a good thing. But it's a necessary mindset shift that needs to happen in many of the industry players.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems that we have to worry about is that if you're getting a whole lot of negative results, don't for 1 minute think that you don't have a positive result the next day or the next week. So you can't just rely on, it's negative, it's negative, it's negative, it's negative. Okay, it's fine. No, it's not fine. There could be a problem. I always had a fancy professor, and if he's listening, he'll know who he is, but he says to me, if it's positive, it's there. If it's negative, it's probably still there. and that's so true.
You're right.
The number of times I've had issues with customers, not issues per se, but I tested it, it's not there, it must be perfect. Yeah, but that's like a needle in a haystack. How do we know that the sample is homogeneous? How do we know that the organism is motile and all over the place? We could have found it, or we could have just sampled the wrong spot. So it's very, very important to make sure that when we talk
Yeah.
microbiology, on the day of production, I tested it and the results came back and everything's perfectly clean, but I abused it with temperature, and 5 days later it's blowing up everywhere. You just tested it too early. Did you take a sample and keep it at 35 degrees Celsius and saw what happened 3 days later? Did it blow up? If you abuse it with temperature, it might show you things that are happening that you have no idea about in the original COA. Taking something off the line and testing immediately typically reveals very low counts. So you've got to verify the product. You've got to verify a whole lot of other things. But getting back to
the thing, I mean,
environmental-
on that note, if you're not doing environmental testing, you'll never know that it's there or not there. Whereas with a proper, well thought out environmental testing program, if it's there, there's more likely chance of picking it up than not.
Yeah.
If you're not doing anything. So
Yeah,
and then you
unfortunately,
can sort it out.
testing in industry is a grudge purchase. Let's be frank. Guys don't want to spend money on it. No, we touched on that earlier. I don't know if that was when we were talking earlier of ourselves or on this podcast, but you don't want to spend like a business doesn't want to spend money. We want to save money. We don't want to have overheads. We make more profit if we don't spend money. We also cannot test everything. Testing is a destructive process. If I'm testing absolutely every product, I don't have any product to sell, and then I just lose money. So there's a very big balance there, because the cost of quality is you need to do the testing. Okay, like how much are you going to spend? And it's all about at what point you blow up and you have problems. So having that fine line between testing too much, testing just the right amount, and testing too little, it's always a problem. And to try and figure out what's right or what's wrong it's a very difficult thing, because you might have just not done the right amount today and you didn't find the problem, and now you have an issue. On that note, though, what is sort of the first steps for processes to put a program together? How do we spoke a bit about zoning, but like, what's right, what's wrong? How much do you do? How much don't you do? Where do we start?
Well, here's the thing: is just to start. If you've got your HACCP program in place, you'll have your risks, you'll have your zones, identify where those risks are, and just start. But you don't have to start big. Just start small. It can become quite overwhelming if all of a sudden you realize, oh, I have to test every single corner of my facility. No, just identify certain high-risk areas, start with those, see what comes up. If there's a problem, sort it out, retest. Okay, we've got that zone sorted out. Now let's move to the next zone and see what happens there. And introduce environmental testing slowly over your facility. And eventually you'll be covering it and maintaining it. And then don't just do the testing and have a look at the result. Use that data. It's valuable data. And then so my big thing is this: don't get overwhelmed. Change your mindset. See it as an amazing tool, and just start small. It doesn't have to be overwhelming, but at least start and get it going.
No. At 100 swabs, 53 rand a swab, 5,300 rand for 100 swabs, 100 swabs a month. Probably excessive for the small business. It's probably sort of reasonable for the big businesses. If you're in the high risk game, if you're making salads or processed meat or things like that, it's probably wise to be spending the 5,300 a month on doing rapid environmental monitoring swabs. In a smaller environment, if you're working in a bakery environment with biscuits, the likelihood of you having the same level of testing is maybe not necessary. I say that. Another thing is, we're talking bacteria here. Allergen verification is environmental monitoring on allergen cross-contamination. That is included in environmental monitoring as well. It's not maybe something you deal with, but when we deal with the programs, it would have to be considered. But it's very important that the size of things and the frequency is representative. If you're doing a 300 million a year turnover, for you to not be justifying 10,000 Rand a month in environmental monitoring, you probably should be at that sort of level, if not more. If your turnover is only, 2 million a year because you're a little mom and pop shop making something in the background, I hope you're not doing high risk meat processing in a facility like that, but you obviously don't have the finances to then do it. And so you need to take a pragmatic approach. I think for our audience, if you're wanting more assistance with this and for us to maybe come and help you with defining a risk-based environmental monitoring program, feel free to reach out to us. Neil's available on the Food Collective. Neil Madgwick, Science Consulting. He's listed there. You guys can find him under services or under consulting if you search the company categories. And you can contact and reach out to myself as well through the consultancy Serious SA. You can definitely assist. But I think the most important thing is to ask questions. Learning happens by listening and then engaging. And engaging, we're encouraging you guys to ask questions. So, Neil, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of it. I really appreciate it. And onward and upward.
Yeah,
thank you very much.